Welcome back. We're going to continue from where we've left off in the last video. We're going to move on from the text colors, and then we're going to add all the rest of the form section, which includes the text line and also various names and contact information. So now we're going to move on to the text line section. So let's go into the text editor, and then just underneath the change text section, let's just copy this section and then paste that in below. So this one's going to work slightly different to the last ones we looked at, because there's going to be 3 different inputs, and every time one of these inputs is clicked, we want to grab the ID and then pass that to JavaScript to determine whether the CSS should be aligned left, right or center. Okay, so we can reuse the label, and this time we just want to give it a label called text align. And then still within the call SM9 section, we're going to create 3 different inputs. So the first one is going to be the type of button, and then the class of btn info. The value we'll pass in is going to be the text inside the button. So this is the left button, and then we're going to pass an ID into there of text left. And this is actually a bootstrap class, but I'll show you exactly what we're going to do in just a second. So we're going to create a on-click event handler, and when the button's pressed, it'll then trigger a function called text align. And then inside the brackets, we're going to pass in a parameter of this.id. So this part will make more sense when we move on to the JavaScript section, but basically what we're doing is every time the button is clicked, we'll then trigger the text line function, and depending on which of the 3 buttons is pressed, it will then grab the ID. So in this case it's text left, and then using JavaScript we'll add this text left ID, and then we'll add it on as a class name. So then once this is pressed, the text inside the business card will then have the text left alignment, and the same for text center and text right. But it should make more sense when we get to the JavaScript section. So just duplicate this button 2 more times, and we're going to use exactly the same text line function, but we just need to change the ID. So the middle one is going to be text center with the value of center, and then the third button has the value of right, and then the ID of text right. So all 3 buttons trigger the same function, but we'll just pass it in a different ID depending on which button is pressed. So let's take a look at that and refresh. So there's our 3 buttons. So now we can move on to the user's name, the job title, email and telephone number. So these are pretty straightforward sections. So we can just copy the form groups that we've already created and then paste that in below the buttons. So the first one is the input name, the label value of your name, change the ID, and we can remove the value because we're not using the color. So let's remove the color type and change this back to text. And then we need this to be on key up. So when the key is pressed, we'll then trigger a function called print name. And then let's do the same for the job title. So copy that and then paste. So input job. The ID is input job 2. And then the label is job title, and then on key up, print job, and then the email section. So let's create a new form group once again, paste it in just below. So this needs to be the input email, and then change the ID. The label is simply email, and this time we need to change the input type to be email, so JavaScript can do some validation on that. And then on key up, print email function. And then the last one we need to do is for the contact number. So let's just copy this last form group for the telephone number, which is input telephone, change the ID, the title of telephone number, and then the input type of tel, and then on key up, print telephone. Okay, so save that and check that out in the browser, and that should be all of the input types all completed now. So we just need to add the submit button and then also a button to clear the form. So let's add them now. So we can put these inside their own form group as well. So create a new div with the class of form group, and then let's add the bootstrap grid. So a div, so let's give this a class of call sm3, so it takes up 3 columns, and then also a offset call sm offset 3. And then inside the div we can put the input, and the first one we need to add is the input type of button, and this is for the submit button. And then on click we'll create the function form submit, and then the button value is equal to submit, and then lastly the button for the form reset or the clear. So we can create this full div from the one above and just remove the offset this time. So again we need the input type of button. On click we'll create the function form reset with the value of clear. So let's take a look at the browser and check it's all working fine. So refresh that, and there we go. So there's our business card and all the forms, the submit button and also the clear button at the bottom. So to finish off the HTML, we just need to create the div on the right hand side, which is for the business card, and this is going to have all the information that the user inputs into the form. So let's create a comment just to make it a bit more readable, and this is the output section, and we just need to make sure we've got this in the right section. So I'm just going to cut that, and that's the end of our form. So let's just tidy this up a little bit. So bring the form up to the top, and then this one should be the closing container for the container fluid. So there we go. So we can now keep all this within the container fluid. So make sure that the closing div is below the output section. Okay, so now let's create the business card section. So let's create a bootstrap grid for this side. So the class needs to be call sm12. So just like the left hand section, it will be the full width of the screen on smaller devices. And then once we get to a larger device, we can add call md6, and this will take up 6 parts or half the width of the screen. So the left hand section and the right hand section will sit side by side. And then a new div, and this is going to have the ID equal to card, because this is the business card section. And we'll use this ID for the styling and also for the JavaScript in this section. So let's put the company name into a level 3 heading. So let's put company name, and we'll just put that as a placeholder until the user adds some information into the form, and then that will override the text of company name. We need to give it an ID. So because we're now on the output section, we can add the ID of output company. And then next we need to do the output message, which is this section there. So below the level 3 heading, let's put this in p tags, and then the ID of output message, and this is going to have a bootstrap class of small, just so it's a little bit smaller than the rest of the text, and then the text of company message, and then duplicate this section, and this is going to be for your name or the user's name. So the text is your name. We can keep the bootstrap class of small, but this time change the output to have an ID of output name, and duplicate this again, and this is the output job. Again, the class of small and the name of job title. Let's take a look. Okay, so it's starting to come together now. So after the job title, we need to also add the email and telephone number. So let's duplicate this 2 more times. So output email, and the text can be of email. Lastly, output telephone, and the name of tel with a colon at the end. And let's just bring that up a little bit closer and save. And that should be it once you refresh. If you go over to the project, and there's all our information on the business card on the right hand side. So that's the user interface section all complete. And in the next video, we'll move on to add in some CSS and also move on to the JavaScript.